Tonight on Wales This Week, the heartbreaking story of a 2-year-old boy who died with a rare disease which wasn't identified until after his death.
I picked him up, he wasn't breathing. So I carried him in here. I screamed. Michael phoned the ambulance. We tried CPR. It's just too late.
He died at Wales's biggest hospital. His family believes opportunities were missed to do more for him. They're campaigning for lessons to be learned.
I just feel like we was never meant to keep him. We were supposed to save lives. I can't let him die in vain. You're supposed to protect your children. You wipe their noses when they get a cold. You put a plaster on them when they cut themselves. Give them cuddles when they're upset. I feel like a failure because I couldn't save him.
Like all newborn babies, Dylan O'Brien was a source of tremendous joy and pride for his parents. But there was worry too. From the start, they knew there was something wrong.
He'd throw up on his bottle, choking till he was blue in the face. Constantly ill all the time with various colds and viruses. We'd take him to the doctors, they'd tell us it was viral, nothing we can do. Or a child is supposed to catch 10 to 12 viruses a year. That's what they expect.
Dylan's physical appearance also caused some concern.
His eyes were quite wide apart, his ears were quite low, and he had a flat head. It's actually called facial dysmorphia. He also had hypermobility in his ankles, which they said was the reason for his delay in walking.
When he died last year, Dylan had waited 9 months for one important appointment, and an operation he needed was cancelled just the day before his death. Dylan O'Brien was born in February 2010 at the University Hospital of Wales in Cardiff. His mum, Claire, already had 3 children, and she knew immediately that Dylan was not progressing as the others had.
He was different. Developmentally, he was different. He didn't crawl till he was 21 months. He couldn't do the things what Shannon, Stefan and Courtney was doing at that age.
The family had another reason to be fearful. Dylan's father, Michael, had previously lost a child with his first wife to cot death. Michael O'Brien is a well-known miscarriage of justice campaigner. He served more than a decade in prison for a murder he did not commit. His 3-month-old baby, Kylie, died while he was on remand in 1988. He hoped Dylan's birth would be a bright new start.
For me, that was a turning point in my life. You know, I just felt that something was going right.
On the 25th of July 2011, Dylan was examined by consultant community paediatrician Dr. Narad Mathura at Llandoch Hospital. Dr. Mathura identified a number of issues with Dylan's health, including persistent respiratory infections and symptoms suggestive of an obstructive sleep pattern. A number of tests were requested. The family was frightened.
We couldn't put our finger on it. We're not medical experts, but we knew something was wrong.
On September the 19th, 2011, Dr. Mathura assessed Dylan again and further highlighted several health problems. In this letter to Dylan's GP dated 2 weeks later, Dr. Mathura explained he was referring Dylan for additional examination. One referral related to concern about Dylan's subtle dysmorphia in the context of his learning difficulties. This was to be assessed by a referral to a specialist genetics team for a diagnosis.
They said that they were going to refer him to genetics, so obviously they thought there was a genetic problem, but they didn't give me any reason for all of the symptoms collectively. They just said because his enzyme count was too high and the facial features, they was going to refer him to genetics.
The family says they assumed the referral to genetics had been made after the appointment.
I waited until February. I heard nothing. So at the beginning of March, we contacted our MP, Jonathan Evans, and he wrote a letter to the NHS.
On March the 5th, 2012, Cardiff North MP Jonathan Evans wrote to Cardiff and Vale University Health Board. He asked why more progress had not been made to arrange an appointment with a consultant with specialist expertise in genetics. On March the 26th, the UHB's Deputy Chief Executive Paul Hollard wrote back to the MP. In the letter, he said he wanted to apologise to Dylan and his family for the distress they have experienced as a consequence of the delay in access to a genetics appointment.
We did have a letter of an apology for all the delays, but it wasn't just the delays we were concerned about, it was the fact that we didn't know what was wrong with him.
Also in the letter, Paul Hollard said a number of referrals had been made following Dr Mathura's assessment of Dylan the previous autumn, but he apologised that a copy of the actual genetics referral letter is not available. It seemed to the family that the referral letter, which Dr Mathura had dictated, had either gone missing or had not been sent at all. Paul Hollard said he had now contacted genetics to request they expedite an appointment for Dylan at their earliest convenience.
I had a phone call from genetics 2 days after we received an apology letter from the NHS into the delay of Dylan's appointments. And they said to come and do the family history, but because Dylan had already had the blood test by that point for a chromosome test, they said it was better to wait until the results came in before I actually saw a genetics doctor. Dylan never actually got to see a genetics doctor.
As well as the referral to genetics, Dylan O'Brien was also due to have an important operation. A sleep study at the end of October 2011 had shown a mild degree of desaturation in his oxygen levels. He was having difficulty breathing in his sleep.
He would wake up choking in the middle of the night, but they kept asking me, does he stop breathing in his sleep? Well, I don't know, because when he's asleep, I'm asleep, and that was my answer. So they said because of his enlarged tonsils as well, he needed to be checked out by an ENT.
Dylan was seen by consultant ENT surgeon Gareth Williams on February the 2nd, 2012. He said Dylan urgently needed his tonsils and possibly his adenoids removed. Because of Dylan's other health issues, Mr. Williams said he would need a bed on the high dependency unit when he had the operation. That operation to remove his tonsils would also never happen.
It was cancelled a number of times, 4 times in total, twice by myself because Dylan was just not well for the operation, and twice by the NHS for no beds.
And when was the last time it was cancelled?
The day before he died. He died on the day he was supposed to have the operation.
The hospital cancelled the operation on March the 23rd and again on June the 15th, the day on which Dylan died. The last 24 hours of Dylan's life are etched into his parents' memories.
Oh. Yeah, I remember it was a Thursday night. He was walking around here, you know, talking dada, playing with his toys. I was lying on the settee where you are now, and he came over to me and he kissed me on the lips, like, you know. And I said to him, oh, that's nice, Dylan. Pulled him up on the settee with me. He was drinking his bottle, and I give him, you know, picked up his bottle, and I give him a hug.
He woke up a couple of times during the night. He was very unsettled. He was sick. But that became the norm, you know. We got used to it. We handled it. I woke up at 8 o'clock in the morning, and the first thing I noticed was he wasn't snoring. I picked him up, he wasn't breathing. So I carried him in here. I screamed. Michael phoned the ambulance. We tried CPR. It's just too late.
And I knew, by the look in his eyes, he was gone. But my heart was saying, no, he can't. I then went up to the hospital, and he was pronounced dead. They said they tried everything. They tried for a while to try to revive him, but there was nothing which could be done. And the shock for me and Claire was, we didn't expect that. We knew there was something wrong, but not that he was going to die.
Dylan O'Brien died on June the 15th, 2012. After his death, the family wanted to understand more about why his life had been so tragically cut short. In part 2, we find out what they discovered. When 2-year-old Dylan O'Brien died, his family were concerned that certain tests that they thought might have helped had not been carried out. The toddler had suffered a number of illnesses during his short life, but had always remained bright and cheerful.
He was always happy child, always laughing, joking, no matter how ill he was, and he lighted up the room. He was always laughing, giggling. I mean, he was a wonderful child. Even through all his illnesses, he was just, well, to us, he was our angel.
Michael O'Brien lost one child through cot death with his first wife. When he had Dylan, filmed here, aged 8 months, he and his new wife Claire could have been offered extra help as part of the Care of Next Infant or CONI programme.
CONI programme is very important. It helps people who have had stillborns or lost a child in future pregnancies.
But the family says no referral was made by medical staff, even though the cot death was recorded on Claire's antenatal notes.
We wasn't booked in at 28 weeks. I don't know why we wasn't booked in at 28 weeks, but they support right through the pregnancy and when the child is born.
It was not until a post-mortem examination was carried out on Dylan's body that it was discovered that he'd been suffering from a metabolic disorder.
How is it that we know they had a disease?
The results of the post-mortem.
So effectively what could have been identified by the genetics department in that 9 months was only eventually identified after he had died.
Yeah.
And how does that make you feel?
Sick. Because I knew there was something wrong.
Tests which were planned but never carried out would have identified the disorder sooner.
Would have diagnosed him with the disease. He would have been on permanent antibiotics to keep the infections down.
A pathologist recorded that Dylan's death was caused by bronchopneumonia, a metabolic disorder, and enlarged tonsils. The pathologist told Dylan's inquest that the bronchopneumonia could have developed suddenly without causing symptoms. He did not know if Dylan would have died if his tonsils had been removed. The family says the operation to remove Dylan's tonsils would have made him more comfortable.
He would have removed the obstruction. It probably wouldn't have necessarily stopped him from choking, but it would have made his life a whole lot easier. He would have been able to sleep better.
Tests into which metabolic disorder Dylan had have continued since his death. One possibility is that he had a disease called mucolipidosis type 2. Patients with the disease sometimes end up on permanent antibiotics to prevent chest infections. The family wonders whether if Dylan had been on antibiotics, he might have been well enough to go through with the tonsillectomy earlier.
I'm not saying it would have been a perfect fix, but he would have definitely been able to cope better with the infections he was getting.
The need for the removal of Dylan's tonsils and adenoids had been identified at the beginning of February 2012 by consultant ENT surgeon Gareth Williams. After assessing Dylan, he wrote to his GP and described the toddler as a child with obvious breathing problems, who showed evidence of significant sleep apnea, abnormal or low breathing while asleep. He said the severity of Dylan's problems warranted fairly urgent intervention, and he had put him on the operation waiting list. Mr. Williams later told Dylan's inquest that in February 2012 his urgent waiting list was about 6 months long. He said he had no reason to believe the situation with Dylan's tonsils was immediately life-threatening. Dylan's mum understands there's a shortage of beds in the hospital's high-dependency unit.
There is a serious problem with lack of HDU beds at the Children's Hospital of Wales. There's only 4, and 3 of those are permanently occupied, so technically there's only 1. So, and that's for all the doctors. 1 bed. Not good enough.
Despite the waiting list, Mr. Williams told Dylan's inquest that he had felt Dylan's problem was so significant that he should have the operation in a few weeks. The operation was cancelled twice by the family because Dylan was ill, and twice by the hospital. The family say they were told there was no HDU bed available. Dylan never had the operation or the blood test, which was to be taken at the same time. This examination of Dylan's blood would have identified the metabolic disorder which contributed to his death.
That test would have picked up the metabolic disease. We'd have known. We'd have known what was wrong with him. We'd have been able to not care for him better, but if we'd have known that there was a life expectancy, we would have been prepared for that as well.
The need for a genetics referral had been raised in September 2011. Consultant community paediatrician Narad Mathura said in view of Dylan's subtle dysmorphia and learning difficulties, he would refer him to the genetics team. At Dylan's inquest, Dr. Mathura said he recalled dictating the referral letter following the September appointment, but that it could not be found 6 months later when the hospital was contacted by the O'Brien's MP inquiring about the delay. The family says although they received an apology about the delay, They have never received an adequate explanation as to why the original referral letter apparently never reached its destination.
There's been no explanation given to us as to why that letter never got to genetics until after we got the MP involved.
When Dylan died in June 2012, 9 months after the family were told he was being referred to genetics, he was still waiting for tests to be carried out by the genetics department. His father says the family still does not understand why, despite the apology letter written by the hospital to their MP in March and the hospital's promise to expedite the appointment, Dylan still never had the tests from the specialist genetics team.
The significant fact that after that, even though that genetics referral was made, Dylan still didn't get to see genetics before he died.
Dylan's inquest took place in Cardiff in November 2012. The coroner recorded a verdict of death by natural causes.
Cardiff and Vale University Health Board told us that its sympathy was with the family and that it had offered to meet them to discuss their concerns about Dylan's care.
Dylan was about 18 months old when his brother Dainton was born. Dylan's slow development meant they were just beginning to play together when his life was cut short.
Dylan didn't understand. He was only a baby. He was a 1.5-year-old, but he was probably about a 9-month-old in the brain. So he didn't understand. He was his brother. As Dainton got older and he was doing more things, they played together. They always played together.
That's a nice smile. Come on. Whee! Come on. Whee! See, have a look. Look at these.
Michael and Claire O'Brien are trying to look to the future for the sake of Dainton and Claire's 3 older children. They're also setting up a charity in Dylan's name.
It's going to be called Voices for Dylan, the Dylan O'Brien Foundation, and our aim is to provide sleep apnea machines at the first diagnosis of sleep apnea. Because if we'd have had a machine, we'd have had that warning. The alarm would have gone off. Also, it's going to raise awareness about the disease that Dylan had.
Dylan's name's got to live on. And the only way we can do that and keep our head above water is by helping other people. We don't want to see families having the shock of their lives like we did.
There is no suggestion of negligence in Dylan O'Brien's case, but it is now going to be the subject of an investigation.
The Cardiff and Vale University Health Board said in a statement that it had agreed to undertake a full independent review of Dylan's case. It said it would fund the review as part of a commitment to openness and transparency, and that it would contribute to the O'Briens' legal costs. It said it had nothing further to add until the review had been completed.
As Michael and Claire O'Brien prepare to contribute to the review, they're trying hard to rebuild their lives.
We're coping, just about. Trying to keep everything together for the other children, the baby, Mike, and people just think I'm strong. But I'm not that strong. I just haven't good at hiding it, that's all. I gotta hide it because I've got other children.
Because even if we only save one life, and stop one family going through what we went through, then Dylan wouldn't have died for nothing.